What's happened is that they've contracted about 2 million acres of land across the Midwest in the US. And we've signed an exclusive contract with them so that for the next 9 years, all of those credits will be coming into our warehouse.
Today we have Irfan, the CEO of Dovu, to talk about some big news that just dropped. Irfan, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. To start off with these questions, let's go with a quick refresher on what Dovu is.
Yeah. Well, Dovu's been around for a little while, actually. We started in 2016, 17 on Ethereum when we first launched. We got some back in from Jaguar Land Rovers. We had some corporate investors, which was a sort of hairy time for them when we did an ICO to have sort of a public company sort of as an investor in the business in the really early days of crypto, of course. But I won't sort of bore you through the full history of everything. The what basically what we do is we're trying to build and are building the trust layer, the audit trail, a usable one, okay, for anybody who wants to create a digital asset. And around that, you wrap a lot of tooling, a lot of sort of services to make that work, whether that's fast onboarding through AI-driven workflow sort of design systems, a massive warehouse where these assets are stored and can be found, APIs that connect into these warehouses, a set of standards so people know what they're searching for. So like is for like, basically. And that's what we've been sort of building up, built on Hedera, just allows us to create this sort of super efficient, cost-effective, digital sort of landscape that we think the whole world is walking into.
Like you mentioned, you have been around for a while, so I was actually surprised that you said something that I really didn't consider when it came to Dovu, and I just want to get some clarification. So, when I think of Dovu, I think of environmental assets, but you just said assets. Are you going to remain focused on environmental assets, or are you possibly going to expand outward?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that Dovu sort of evolved really was actually we started off working, hence the investment from Jaguar Land Rover at sort of tokenizing behavior in connected vehicles. It was a completely different sort of proposition, but it's trying to solve the same problem, which is how do you trust communication when there's sort of conversations, for want of a better term, between digital assets. We then realized we were way, way, way too early in the connected vehicle sort of space. And me being a farmer from Wales, I looked at the whole sort of carbon credit and environmental assets sort of problem and thought, wow, this is ripe, for a hash graph or a DLT sort of proposition, really, because nobody trusts it. Nobody knows, it's such an opaque sort of business. Is that carbon credit actually valid? Is it not valid? Has it been retired? Where is it? And so on. So you need that trust layer and audit trail. So that's what we focused on. And Dovu Earth was created to solve that problem. And the one of the things then that sort of happens is that people say, well, if you're just going to do that with a digital asset, why does it have to be so reliant on that particular sort of sector? You could sort of do it with lots of other things as well. That's really where we've ended up, is that our system, our platform, it doesn't care what asset it is. It just takes a look at that asset and says, hey, let's have some standards around it. Let's sort of mint it. Let's create a trust layer and an audit trail. Let's build some workflow tools so that you can simplify the onboarding of it, and let get that stuff minted and published and placed somewhere. So we're seeing a pipeline of projects now that are outside of the environmental sort of space, sort of coming into Dovu saying, right, okay, we'd like to sort of use your platform to do all sorts of stuff that we wouldn't have thought of. And that's sort of leading us really down where we're sort of heading, is anybody with some expertise will be able to use our AI tooling and digitize a workflow. You'll be able to put that workflow into the equivalent of an app store, let's say a workflow app store. You'll then be able to, anybody will be able to use those workflows to create digital assets. And then you, as a designer of that workflow, will earn royalties every time it's used. So on our system. So it's a phenomenal mechanism that's just expanding every day, really. So we're really excited about where we're headed.
Well, it sounds like there's plenty of room for expansion there. So now let's get into the topic for the day. Can you tell us about the VCH Carbon Development Program that you just announced last week?
Yeah, really exciting for us. So Veteran Carbon Holding is a company based in the US. It was led by a scientist and Stephen Gorton, and he's been working on the science behind a product that has been rolled out to farmers in the Midwest initially and in the USA. And that product increases the yield of the crops and increases the amount of carbon that gets stored as a result of the yield in the crops in the soil. So it sequesters carbon into the soil, improves the soil health, and actually delivers a increased yield for the farmer of between 6 and 8%, for the crops themselves. And it's not using chemicals. So they've been working on that for a number of years, doing all the soil samples, all the soil testing. And then they went to an organization called B Carbon. B Carbon are a spin-off out of Rice University in Texas, and they're a not-for-profit organization that focuses on the science, the testing and the verification and the methodology. So you look at it from a workflow perspective. Stephen creates the IP and the technology. He then contracts with the farmers who own the land or managing the land. He then does the soil sampling. A third party comes in and says, hang on a minute, do we believe, what these guys are sort of saying? We need to do this test. We need to map out the methodology, and then we need to certify it. So that's what B Carbon do. They certify it. And then they say, oh, actually, what do we do with it now? Well, actually, Dovu's got this phenomenal platform where we can sort of digitize and create the trust layer of all of this carbon that's sort of being created. They've built a warehouse that can house it. Imagine Walmart, and we've got loads of shelves, and we're putting those carbon credits into those shelves. And then there's APIs that access this sort of warehouse, this digital warehouse, so that any demand partner around the world who wants to sell these credits can plug into our warehouse and sell them. So it's a sort of that's the sort of business model. So far, what's happened is that they've contracted about 2 million acres of land across the Midwest, and other territories in the US. And we've signed an exclusive contract with them, so that for the next 9 years, all of those credits will be coming into our warehouse. And they don't all come in at once; they come in at sort of various points. And I'm happy to go through sort of how that works. But what's important to state here is that this press release, this announcement, is veterans' announcement. So it's their farmers with V Carbon backing it up with their science and their knowledge. It isn't a sort of some sort of crypto announcement on some nonsense number that sort of gets pushed out there. This is us managing, their credits that come through into our warehouse and make them available to be sold. So we're really excited about what's happened in there. And I don't know if you've got any questions on that, but I can sort of enhance that a little bit.
I do. Well, the first thing that I want to say is that it's a hard sell to get a farmer to reforest, the fields. I mean, that of course they aren't going to get any income from that besides whatever they might get from the carbon credits. But it's not hard to sell a farmer on getting higher yields. And if you get higher yields and you can get these carbon credits and get some revenue through that as well, it seems like everybody's interests are aligned. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, it's really, really good point. As a farmer, son of a farmer myself, the debate within the farming community right now is how much usable land do you give up to meet environmental goals? How much land do you give up which actually can grow something, whether that's livestock or whether that's crops, to put a tree on, or to rewild in some way, when we've got a massive problem in the world really on feeding everyone in a sort of affordable way. So it's a real challenge. The other part of it is that farmers are under massive pressure right now, with whether it be tariffs or whether it be cost of living or whether it be whatever that is. These family farms are really, really struggling. So what we've seen is that the family farmers are sort of, a lot of them are leaving the business and corporates are moving in, and there's more corporate farming. And what really farmers want to do is they get a huge amount of pride in feeding people, and the crops that they create. So you're absolutely right. For us to, work with partners like veterans, to be able to go into farms and say, hey, you can stay on your farm and you can earn more. You can stay on your farm. Not only can you earn more, but you're also helping the environment. You're doing that as well. And you've got another crop to sell. This crop now is called carbon. So you've got the core crop that you're selling or using, and then you've got carbon as well as an additional revenue source. And it's that additional revenue source, that's so important, to farmers because they want to do what's best for the environment, but also they're a business, so they need to make profit. So I'm really excited about that, and I think this 2 million acres that we're talking about is the first sort of part. We've got projects in our pipeline for Australia. We've got projects in our pipeline using the same technology and using the same sort of partners. And we've got projects in our pipeline across America as well, which are sort of lining up. And then also in Europe. So we see this as very much a sort of a long-term, hugely valuable to all stakeholders sort of project.
So the next thing that I want to touch on, you're talking about some big numbers. You're talking about 2 million acres. The number that I think caught a lot of people by surprise was $1.1 billion worth, and it sounds like you have a lot more business on the way. When do you think these carbon credits are actually going to start to hit the Hedera network?
Yeah, so the way that it works is that you sort of take a baseline of the carbon that's sitting in the soil, and then you measure it over a period of time. So the first thing that you'll see on the network will be about 186,000 acres of farmland that'll be first coming in, and we expect that to be coming in imminently. Those 186,000 probably will equate to a ton of carbon per acre. And again, that's a sort of a baseline number. The numbers that we're seeing from the scientists is that within each acre, you could sequester up to 5 tons. But what needs to happen is that you take your baseline and then you measure it again in sort of normally 12 months' time. In 12 months' time, you then see what the balance is between the 1 ton that you've been awarded as a credit, by the verify, in this case, B carbon, and the actual amount, which is expected to be, let's say, 5 tons. And then the extra 4 tons then get dropped into the system. So what you're going to see is a cumulative effect over a period of years, building up and building up and building up as the soil gets resampled, as the carbon becomes available because it's credited and verified, and then it comes into our system and then sort of builds and builds and builds. Don't expect 1 billion tons, or $1 billion sort of to happen, overnight. That $1 billion for those 2 million acres is reliant on two things: the cost of carbon credits, because it's linked to a number, the price per ton, and also the speed of the testing as it sort of goes through. And I think that the 1.1 billion is actually quite conservative based on the science.
Well, one of the things when it comes to these carbon credits is they're only worth how much they're trusted, right? And with something like Dovu, the trust is increased, so the value can increase as well, right?
Yeah, there's two levels of trust here, really. The first one is, let's assume that nobody trusts the producer, because they're just selling something. Okay, so what you then need to do is have this verifier that sits there, and this is why B carbon is so important. It's the B carbon. They're the scientists. They're the ones who've got the expertise, and that's why it's taken sort of, I think it's 3 years. Stephen's been working with them to get them to a place where they go, right, we now know that the science is sound. It's been tested. We've got the soil sampling over a period of years. We know what the baseline is. So the trust comes from B carbon. Where Dovu adds the trust and is in the audit element that sort of basically says, hey, when was this soil sampled? By what lab? What were the test results? What was the name of the lab? You could even drill into the lab technician if that was the case. Put that. Let's stamp that. Okay, on the chain. That's stamped, verified. When did it go to B carbon to be checked first? Stamped by them. When did it leave B carbon to go to Dovu? Stamped by them. And then, and where is it now? Is that credit being purchased, or is it still in the warehouse? Has that credit, even though it's been purchased, hasn't been retired? Because some people will buy credits and hope they go up in price, and then they'll sell it further down the line. So where is that credit in the process? That's such an important thing, because you can't then double spend. You can't sell the credit twice. You always have a track as to where those credits are. And so what we do is working with Hedera on their open source product, The Guardian, which we work very closely with. We're able to track that all the way through, and we do that as a non-fungible token. So that token, that credit can't be fractionalized. It can't be, distributed anywhere. We know at any one point where that 1 ton actually is. So yeah, the trust of the technology, the trust of the verifier, the trust of the audit trail, underpinned by the trust of Hedera, creates a more valuable asset.
I was going to ask. I'm always concerned about the sustainability of the businesses that are being built on Hedera. Are they going to have significant revenue to be able to continue their operations? It sounds like Dovu is doing really well in that part of things. So I guess my question is: you have the supply taken care of. It seems like you have a really high quality product in the carbon credits themselves. How are we looking as far as the marketplace and the demand for these credits?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question. Somebody has to buy them at the end of the day. And I think what we're seeing is a market that is in flux right now, whether that's through political means or sort of fatigue with what's happening. But this is a market that's you're flowing downstream. You're going with the flow, right? This isn't going to go away. Companies, organizations need to manage their carbon output in whatever way that is. And the best way of managing their carbon output is to reduce the amount of carbon needed to produce whatever they produce. That's the best thing. But obviously, there's going to be the leftovers, the carbon that is unavoidable. So the incentive, which is going to be carrot and stick by governments and by other incentives sort of put in, is that these organizations need to balance the books. And there's definitely no doubt about that. So where we're at right now is that there isn't really enough quality carbon out there for organizations to balance their books. And this was before AI. The amount of carbon that is being produced right now for the AI landscape that we're in is unbelievable. The amount of energy needed to actually, fulfill our AI dreams as they sort of go forward. So our business model is really simple. We go after corporates. We create simple ways via APIs and others things for corporates to connect to our supply. And one of the beautiful things about being part of Hedera, of course, is that they've got a healthy governing council, which is full of corporates. As I mentioned earlier, our first investor is Jaguar Land Rover, who's owned by Tata, who's just happens to be on the governing council as well. And anybody who looks into the Tata group of companies or family of companies will realize how much carbon they're going to need to purchase in order to balance their books. So I think the first thing is you build a quality of supply, in a market that is growing and inevitable. Nobody sat there saying, "Hey, I want to give you $10 million, $20 million, $30 million. Go and find the supply." You really do need to get that sort of supply right first, and that's always been a challenge as well for producers, because how do they find the capital to actually start creating this sort of quality supply? So there's a lot of moving parts to this, but we're not concerned about the demand, but we're also not sort of stupidly optimistic. That's not Dovu's style anyway. It's not my style. We build something that sort of hopefully makes sense a year from now, and may not make sense today. That's been the whole thing of Dovu, is like it's bringing carbon credits on chain. Many years ago was seen as like, what's the point? I think it's going to become inevitable. So, and also there's demand points where we don't even know yet. So, one of the other things about creating a digital environment for carbon credits and enabling APIs to connect into this warehouse, there won't be humans looking for these carbon credits. They need to be searchable. They need to be found. They need to be identified, based on their sort of the data around those sort of credits, and then they need to be acquired. So again, you're building something that makes a whole lot of sense in an agentic, future when people want to go and search for credits that meet certain criteria, that meet their corporate goals, that they then can go and purchase. So yeah, lots of reasons why we're optimistic.
All right. So to wrap this up, I'm curious. If there is an entity out there that would like to purchase these credits now or in the near future, how would they go about that?
Yeah, just get onto our website, Dovu.earth. There's plenty of contact points on there. Reach out to me personally. I'm easily found, and there's not many with my sort of crazy Welsh name. So Irvin at Dovu.earth, just sort of reach out to me. But yeah, we've got some great tools as well for developers that want to sort of start using our API, or using our endpoints, looking at our workflow engines. There's plenty of content out there. And Matt Smeddy's our CTO, is very easily approachable. And I can promise you something: if there's any developer out there that wants to talk to Matt, they'll leave the conversation, better off than when they started.
There's no question about that. First of all, and for congratulations on this development. This is huge news. I appreciate you coming on and telling us about it. And of course, thank you for building on Hedera.
Thanks very much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
I'm now posting these interviews of Hedera builders independently to my channel. The community, influencers, and media outlets are free to use this content to spread the word on what's being built on Hedera. Once they're all uploaded, you'll be able to go to my channel and search for whatever topic or team you're interested in to find more information. Or you'll be able to get the most recent Hedera news by watching the latest HBAR Weekly update. So check them out.